This week's step-by-step guide. Well, for this project, I'm going to use a combination of quarter-sawn white oak and plain sawn white oak to make this table. And it's really intended to match the style of a Craftsman Period rocker that I built at the end of last year. I also don't have a jointer, but if you put a good trim blade on your table saw, making sure it's set at 90 degrees, it winds up giving me great edges that I can glue together. But let's talk about why use oak at all, especially for furniture. It's so pedestrian. It's so 10 minutes ago. It's what every set of kitchen cabinets was made out of in every house built in the 80s and 90s. But we're not talking about red oak in this particular case, or the same type of red oak that you'll find at the home center in trim wood and molding. This is North American white oak, which is more dense and more rare, and it's the stuff most heavily used in Craftsman and Mission style furniture. More clamps? It's time for another episode of Woodworkers and SUVs Buying Tools. And so, heading to my favorite, or maybe not my favorite, home center, at least they carry decent quality clamps. We picked up a couple more. Hey, do you know what the one thing is you can never have too many of? Clamps. That or some nice baklava. You know, you find a local bakery, it's got some nice baklava. You want to take a couple pieces home. Take 6. So a couple of design elements I'm trying to bring to this table include some L-shaped legs, which match the ottoman to my rocker. I'm also going to try to cut a waffle pattern on the lower shelf, and the overall dimensions of the table will be 48 by 17 at the tabletop and 26 inches in height. And so now with the extra clamps and my biscuits already cut into the tabletop planks, I'm going to glue the first 2 pieces together and make sure I get the excess glue out of there with some soapy water so I can stain the boards later. And now I'll get a good clamp up, and when this sets, I'll add the 3rd board to give me my total dimension out beyond 17 inches in width. Now, this may be the most difficult chunk of wood to buy for this project. This is quarter sawn white oak, 5/4 inches in thickness. And so it's 1.25 inches overall in thickness. And the quarter sawn wood was really difficult to find at my supplier. In fact, I could not have bought enough quarter sawn wood to do the entire table. They just didn't have it. So I decided to use the quarter sawn, the prettier wood, for the legs, and my tabletop will be plain sawn. And this is the L-shaped, or the beveled leg construction shown here. I also found one of the best and easiest ways to put these together is using painter's tape on the leading edge, and then also use painter tape to pull the pieces together. And if you put some tension on the tape, it'll pull those joints together. And every few inches, just add another piece of tape, put some tension on it as you pull it across, and it helps act as a spring to pull those 2 pieces together. It works really well. And the next day, it's time to pull everything off and take a look at what kind of cleanup we might have with glue. In fact, there was a little bit on the inside that needed to be gouged out. And then to cut this down to its final length, because the material is so wide, I had to use a circular saw, but with a guide, it helps to cut a clean edge. Well, if there was ever any doubt about the strength of a tight bond 3 and a glue joint, you have to check out my tabletop cutoff. So this little piece here is actually glued on just right here to all of this weight, and it does a really amazing job just holding its bond. And so now to continue the design to the lower shelf, I'm looking to cut in a 1" by 1" series of square cutouts to make a waffle pattern on that lower shelf. It's a similar design element that you're going to find on some Craftsman style and Mission style furniture, especially by the designer of my original rocking chair, Charles Limbert. And now with all of the 1" squares drawn out, the next challenge is trying to figure out the best way to cleanly cut out these 1" squares. Now, obviously I chose to use a dado stack on my table saw, but I really considered cutting them by hand with a Japanese razor saw and then doing the cleanup work with a sharp chisel. And I think ultimately the result might have been better because the dado blades tended to do some tear out on the back side of each one of these planks. So I had quite a bit of sanding to do on the bottoms of each one of these planks, although I made sure to initiate the cut on the top of this particular shelf. And so the tops of each plank are cut out pretty cleanly. Now, while we showed the strength of the glue in that previous demo, I'm just installing some dowel pins here to help me keep all the planks in alignment so that each row of squares is perfectly straight. I also took it easy with the glue here to eliminate the squeeze out in between each one of the squares. It actually looks really cool. Now talking about the design elements that we took from the rocker, of course I'm using the L-shaped legs on this table, but also a very slight arc on the front of the chair. I want to carry that same arc theme to the apron on the top of the table. In order to accomplish that gradual arc, if you have a really long clamp and a long metal ruler, it helps you draw this nice gradual arc. I have to tell you that every time I cut into a piece of white oak, whether it's on the table saw or bandsaw or I'm drilling into it or sanding it, you get this wonderful fragrance that's a cross between vanilla and toffee. And it reminded me of the way that the wine cellars would smell as you went out to some of the specialty wineries in Napa, Rutherford, and Simi Valley in California. That same fragrance is evident everywhere in those wine cellars as the wine ages in those oak barrels. And it's also a fragrance that you'll pick up in a good bottle of Chardonnay as well. I just love that smell. And so now, using a little hand plane to ease the edges of my shelf, it's time to get these things ready for finish. Now, remember those 45-degree bevels that we cut off of each one of these legs? I cut out 2.5-inch long pieces of that bevel to act as a footer, really, to hold the shelf. And then I also created this custom jig so that I could drill holes in exactly the same location for each one of these apron pieces, and then also transcribe that same hole pattern over to each leg. And I'm relatively confident now that when I put the pieces together, they're all going to fit without any adjustment, and they'll all be nice and square. So here's a workshop tip. Anytime you've got to work quickly with glue and you've got dowels to install and aprons to attach to legs, have a bunch of caffeine in the morning, and it'll allow you to move as quickly as I am in this video. And now with some final assembly, just trying to get things ready to hand it off to my son, Matt, who winds up doing a really great job in finishing my furniture pieces. And let's have one more brief conversation about the type of wood that you're going to see in mission style and craftsman style furniture from the 1900s. Now, white oak is not a typical wood selection because the grain is uneven, but that's what makes it beautiful, especially when you can find quartersawn white oak. The figure, the cross grain patterns are just cool. Now, of course, you're going to see, especially with designs by Gustav Stickley in the mission style, a number of those furniture pieces used cherry, which has a very even grain. In fact, you could manufacture 10 pieces of furniture and every one of them would look exactly the same. And that's one of the things I love about white oak and the figure and the difference in the wood grain. No two pieces are ever going to look the same. Each piece is absolutely unique. Now, to attach the tabletop, I wound up using these little brass L brackets, although having second thoughts, I may change this design and connect the two pieces via more wood dowels. But for now, this helps me get it completely assembled. And one more thing I didn't show in the video, to attach the shelf to the legs, I used red oak dowels to hold everything together. And finally, it came out fantastic. And I love the waffle pattern on the bottom shelf to give it an extra design element, since the table was basically a rectangular piece of furniture. And the quartersawn white oak looks wonderful on the legs as you look at that cross grain pattern. And it very much does match the rocker and the ottoman. The three pieces look fantastic together. And so now I'll include some of this detail in the description as well, but you may want to pause the video and take screenshots of these next 4 pages because it identifies the cut list and also the dimensions that were used in the construction of the table. I really hope this turns out to help you if you attempt this project on your own. I also think you can use a number of different woods to get the problem solved. It doesn't have to be white oak, but again, I wish you the best of luck. It turns out to be a great piece of furniture.